Well, welcome to another flip video lesson with Mr. Volkman. Today's video is titled A New Beginning and Ending. And yes, I know we're talking about the causes of the Civil War, so how can there be a new beginning with the start of the Civil War, which tears the nation apart? That's the ending. Well, you will find out in this video why I have titled it A New Beginning. This is the first video for chapter 21.9. The next video will be 21.9b. Now, normally this is a part of the video where I say, let's begin. However, if you haven't noticed, my shirt says Canada because, well, I am a more laid back and relaxed dressed Mr. Volkman because it's the weekend. So since I hate to distract you with my Canada shirt while I'm talking about the American Revolution, I'm going to fix that problem. Now, let's begin. We need to first talk about a new beginning with the 1860 election. April of 1860, the Democrats met to choose a presidential nominee, and they were very split on who they wanted to nominate. You see, the Southern Democrats wanted someone that could guarantee the rights of slaveholders who were living in the territories. However, this idea was rejected by the Northern Democrats. So the Southern Democrats left the convention, held their own, and they chose a man by the name of John C. Breckinridge. Now, the Northern Democrats preferred popular sovereignty. They wanted territories to choose for themselves whether or not they wanted to allow slavery. So who better than to nominate than the man who started the idea of popular sovereignty? Stephen A. Douglas. They also felt that Douglas was the best man to defeat the Republicans. Well, who did the Republicans choose? Well, none other than Abraham Lincoln, who had become a national figure because of his debates with Douglas 2 years before. Before I go on to see who won the election, I'd like you to take a look at this picture I found online. I did not create it, so I do not take credit for it. This picture is great to show what each of the four candidates in the 1860 election ideas were on slavery. So take a moment, pause the video. You don't need to jot down what their thoughts were, but I want you to really go through and read what each man felt about slavery. One cool way to take notes would be maybe to draw like a little cartoon, little stick figures, and have the stick figures maybe doing something to show what they felt about slavery. And, you know, if it's creative enough, and you show Mr. Volkman in class, next time I see you, you might earn some extra credit. So, hey, take a look, try it. Now, the results of the November 1860 election were very interesting, to say the least. The electoral map, which is what this map shows, if you were to count, Abraham Lincoln received 180 electoral votes. You need 270 to win, or at least you do now. John C. Breckinridge got 72. A gentleman by the name of Bell, whose party felt that the best way to deal with slavery was not to talk about slavery, got 39. And Stephen A. Douglas, the man who had the best opportunity to defeat Abraham Lincoln, got 12. So he showed Abe, didn't he? If you take a look at this map, you can really see where that line was with who got what votes. The northern states all voted for Honest Abe. The southern states all voted for Breckinridge. And then Bell and Douglas got smatterings in kind of the central part of the country. If we go a step further and look at the popular votes, the popular votes are the individual votes each voter had. Abraham Lincoln got 40% of all popular votes, which isn't very much. It's not a resounding like majority. However, Breckinridge, Bell, and Douglas, if you were to combine all their votes, received 60%. 60% amongst three people averages out to about 20%. So in that way, we can see that, yeah, Douglas held a lot of support. But again, if we look at this map, he held that support in the north. Now, there was some problems to this. Problems to Abe Lincoln winning. Because if we look back at that map, we can see that the South didn't want Lincoln at all. In December of 1860, South Carolina unanimously voted to secede or to leave the Union. They thought that the Republican administration would attempt to undermine slavery by appointing anti-slavery judges, postmasters, military officers, and other officials. So they said, we're done, we're through. And they issued a declaration to justify this position. And you may recognize the name of the gentleman who helped to create this Declaration of Independence from the Union. A gentleman by the name of John C. Calhoun, who, if you remember in our study of Andrew Jackson, pushed the nullification crisis to the point where South Carolina wanted to leave the Union at that point as well. So Calhoun finally gets his wish in South Carolina leaving the Union. Now, this is the beginning of the end here. Truly it is. The declaration that South Carolina put together is eerily familiar. It sounds a lot like the Declaration of Independence that our country created way back in 1776. So these were some of the reasons why South Carolina felt it should leave the Union. First off, they said that states were sovereign entities that could leave the Union as freely as they joined it. Hey, if we joined it, we should be able to leave it, no problem. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. They also said that there was an issue of trust at stake here because they felt that the North was not going to return slaves that were captured. Or slaves that ran away would not be returned at all. They felt, hey, non-holding slaves aren't returning this, non-slave holding states aren't returning slaves when they should. They're letting them go free. This breaks the Fourth Amendment, which is if a fugitive runs from one state to another, that second state that captures the fugitive needs to return it. And the northern states aren't doing that. There's also this idea of the right of a state to govern itself, which the federal government wasn't allowing the southern states to do by making them or not allowing other states to have slavery if they wanted. There was also, and this was in the Declaration, this is where South Carolina was kind of getting a little snippy. They said that states have a right to abolish a destructive government. And they felt that the federal government was starting to become destructive. Well, how is it becoming destructive? Well, first off, the non-slave states had just elected an anti-slavery president. They are allowing former slaves to vote. Well, that's, in the southern states' mind, that's very destructive. All in all, they truly felt that there was unequal rights between the non-slave states and the slave states. And in their minds, that's pretty darn destructive. The meaning is destructive in that it's going to hurt the southern states' economy. That's what that means. But let's move on to the actual idea of secession, because between January and February of 1861, 6 more states in the deep South joined South Carolina in leaving the Union. We had Georgia, Florida, not the band, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. However, there was a lot of opposition in these states to leaving the Union, unlike South Carolina, where it was a universal majority feeling of, let's leave. What does this tell us about these states? Well, it tells us one thing. It tells us that compromise was still possible in keeping the Union together. The Upper South had even greater opposition to secession. In Virginia, on February 4th, opponents of immediate secession received twice as many votes as people who wanted to leave. While in Tennessee, voters rejected a call for secession outright. They didn't even get a convention. Voters didn't want to leave the Union. However, not all these stories come with a happy ending of keeping the nation together. In Texas, when they voted for secession to leave the Union, the popular vote was 3-1 in favor of leaving the country. Now, we talked about that there was a chance to save the nation because voters were kind of waffling. They didn't know if they wanted to leave. Between November of 1860 and March 1861, that's when Lincoln was voted into office. to when he was going to take the oath and actually become president, there were two potential compromises. The first came from John J. Crittenden of Kentucky, who held Henry Clay's old Senate seat. You know, Henry Clay, the guy who did all of the compromises himself. Crittenden's proposal was to extend the Missouri Compromise line all the way to the Pacific Ocean. This was in defiance to the Compromise of 1850, which allowed California to be a total free state, but also went against the Dred Scott decision, which said no slave could ever be free. What Crittenden's proposal was, is it would allow slavery forever north of the 3630 line and slavery south of the 3630 line would be allowed forever as well. However, this compromise was shot down twice, in January of 1861 and in March of 1861. Every Republican senator opposed the measure, at least in the January one. In the March 4th one, it was a little closer. It got defeated in the Senate by only one vote. Why would Lincoln's party vote down a potential compromise to keep the Union together? What's not to like about this compromise? Okay, and I'm going to give you directions in class to help you answer this question. Now, we're getting long on time here, so I'm going to try to go through this fairly quick. In February, there was another potential opportunity to save the nation. Virginia called together a peace convention, and it was actually on the exact same day that the new Confederate government was set up in Alabama. Delegates who came together that represented 21 of the 34 states, which is almost 62% of the country. They voted narrowly to suggest to extend the Missouri Compromise line. The delegates also would have required 4/5, or 80% of senators, to vote when it came to acquiring a territory. However, this idea was shot down too. So there would be no compromise. The time for compromise, it seems like, was definitely over. Now, during all this time, the Confederacy, or the southern states, were starting their government. And the headquarters of this government would be in Montgomery, Alabama. And they drafted a constitution, and it was modeled after the American Constitution. And it explicitly guaranteed slavery in all states and territories. The president was given a single 6-year term. They needed a 2/3 vote from Congress to admit new states into their union. It did not allow tariffs on any imports from other places. It also did not allow governments to fund internal improvements. Now, I would love to know your thoughts about why they didn't want any tariffs or any money from the government for internal improvements. It's very interesting. It seems like they're going totally against the United States government. Now, the last thing that they did, or maybe not last, but kind of the first thing that they did, that this country's new acts, was they attempted to seize USA federal property within their boundaries, which included forts, custom houses, which are like banks, and arsenals, which held weapons. Several of these forts remained within Union hands, though, such as Fort Pickens, which is up here, and Fort Sumter, which was down here. Well, thank you for watching this extra long flip video. I'm sorry for the length of it. We had a lot we had to get through. Don't forget to go to Edmodo to check the questions, and I'll see you in class. All right, where's the pause button? It's the weekend, and I'd like a drink of water, please.